You are listening to the Makers Church podcast. For more information about our community, please visit makerschurch.org.
Well, good morning. Welcome to Makers Church. If we've never met yet, my name is Mark. I'm one of the pastors here. And if you guys have been with us the last few weeks, you know we were wrapping up a really cool series called Blueprint, where we're talking about what are the plans that God has for us for a healthy heart. And so we wrapped up that series last week, and we have Mother's Days next week, which we got something special, so you don't want to miss that. And then we have an incredible new series starting after that. But today we're kind of in this weird limbo land of no series. Derek's out of town. He's in London living it up. And so he said, you know what, you can speak, you can talk about whatever you want, which is always a dangerous thing because my brain works in weird ways. And I usually think in crazy, abstract, theoretical things that are, not helpful to anyone. So I'm like, let me try to craft a talk that I need to hear that I think is practical and important for all of us. And it's a topic that will probably be a little bit controversial, that'll probably make us squirm in some ways, which is fun, I like that. But again, I think if we're willing to dive in and be willing to let God speak to us and to wrestle with what he's saying, I think something powerful can happen. And I want to talk this morning about what it means to be a follower, to be an excellent follower. And I feel like that word follower is a dirty word, like especially for our generation and especially in America. Like we don't want to follow anybody. That sounds terrible. We want to talk about leadership. We want to talk about pioneering things. I don't want to talk about being a follower. It's interesting, there's not even a good word to define the state of being for a follower. Like we have leadership, and there's millions of books and podcasts and sermons on that. And then you have scholarship and craftsmanship, sportsmanship. You have the best ship, you have friendship, right? The best of all the ships. But there's no word for fellowship. I kept typing it in my notes and I kept getting the red underline. It's not an English word because no one wants to actually discuss what it means to be an excellent follower. And I think part of that is because there's misconceptions around what that means. But again, we have to dive into this because Jesus over and over and over again in Scripture is giving the invitation to come and follow. All throughout the Gospels, he's interacting with the craziest of people. And he's not dictating to them doctrine or theology. What he simply says is come and see, come and follow, come and experience for yourself and see what happens in your life. It's an invitation to follow, and sometimes we even call ourselves followers of Jesus. But what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus and in the context of our lives? So I want to explore that today. I think again, we have misconceptions of it because we hear the word follow and we think weak. We think passive. We think mindless. We think the inability to make decisions. We think of powerlessness. We think of drones, people that have no will of their own. And I think that is a gross misrepresentation of what Scriptures declares a good follower to be. This is especially a tough topic for someone like me who's a millennial because we come from the generation where it's controversial to say, but we're a little entitled. We're a little selfish. We're a little narcissistic. You know, we were raised to think that we should have power and authority and influence right away, right? We want to be at a company. We want to have a seat at the table. We want to be a decision maker right away from the get-go. We want to be valued. We want our voice to be heard without necessarily even earning that position. And so sometimes when we're not given that or when we're given direction that we don't like, what do we do with that? How do we learn to follow well? And there are some of us who say, well, I don't want to follow. I don't even want to be on a team. This was me growing up. I was that classic, rugged individual American. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I don't want anyone to tell me what to do. I'm just going to live my life. You live your life. Cool. This happens a lot. We have this mentality. But it doesn't really work. Life has shown us that. For one, it leads to isolation and it leads to loneliness, which is an epidemic in our country. But not only does it lead to isolation and loneliness, but it's also ineffective and it's inefficient. We have this saying here that we say it's an African proverb, but who knows, it's probably not, it just sounds cool to say. But we say you can go faster alone, but you can go further together. And I would argue even that's false. You can actually go further together and faster together. And I thought about this when I was watching the Winter Olympics. Does anybody watch the Winter Olympics? Yeah? Summer's cool, I like winter too. But there's this new thing, it's called the speed track. And what it is it's 3 speed skaters on each team. and they just loop around chasing each other. And I thought, this is so weird. And they stay in this tight little line, one behind each other. I'm like, why do they do this? Why don't they just have a single person racing? Why three? And I actually discovered that they do all kinds of intricate drafting. So they'll change positions during the race, and the guy who's leading will then become the follower, and then the follower becomes a leader, and they're switching up roles. And what ends up happening is the individual times are actually faster than the fastest skater could go by themselves. Just the way the physics works, they can actually go further and faster together. It's more effective, it's more efficient to be on a team, not to go it alone. And whenever you talk about team dynamics, you get into these things with leaders and roles, because we all have equal value. We all have equal value, equal worth on a team, but we all have different roles. So what does that look like? And if you say, no, I want a system where everyone is truly equal, that doesn't work. Have you ever tried to decide on where to go to dinner with friends? You ever had that? That's the worst when no one takes charge, right? You spend an hour like, I want to go to Mexican food. No, I want Thai food. And everyone's trying to be really cool and like, oh yeah, I don't really care. I'm cool, I'll do whatever you want, which is not true. No one feels that way. And then you got Frank who's got nut allergies. You've got Martha who can't be anywhere near gluten, not even in the same room, that is true, whoever Martha is. Someone had Mexican for lunch, so they don't want Mexican for dinner. And you spend an hour trying to figure it out until someone finally has the boldness to step up and make a decision. It's usually Shalice. He was like, let's go here. But that's scary to do that, because sometimes if you make the decision, we're all bad followers, and we get there, the line's too long, it's a bigger wait than you thought, and then you're like grumbling about the person who made the decision, and it's angry, and then someone pulls out a Baby Ruth candy bar with nuts, and Frank has anaphylactic shock, and it's like a nightmare. And it's like, why is it so hard to make decisions? We need to have leaders, we need to have followers, and because the reality is, if a leader is someone who has followers, if you do the math, most of us are following in some context in our life, even if we are leaders. I am a leader at work, but I also have a boss. I'm a leader here. I have team members who report to me, but I also have Derek as my boss, and we have the board. So even us, in different contexts, we are leaders and we are sometimes followers, and we incorrectly think that these are diametrically opposed things, when really the same qualities that make an excellent leader are the same qualities that make an excellent follower. So it's really not a qualitative difference, it's just a matter of context. See, if you can curate what it takes to be an excellent follower, when the moment comes that you're called into leadership, you're ready. I remember years ago when we had a really small worship team, my good friend Brian was leading, and he moved to LA, and he tapped Shalice on the shoulder, and he's like, I'm moving, you're in charge now of worship. And she's like, what do I do with that? But she had been curating what it meant to be a good follower, so she was ready to step into that. I remember years ago when we were a small church, very small, we were meeting in North Park, I came and talked to Derek, I'm like, I wish our community was a little more active in the community. I wish our church was doing more things to serve our neighbors. I believe that the call to love is an active one with hands and feet to it. And Derek's, I 100% agree. Why don't you start something and lead it? I had never led before in my life, in any context. But you know what? I had been developing the character that was required to be a good follower. So when we called me into that, I was prepared. I still had a ton to learn. I still have a ton to learn. But it wasn't from a blank scratch, because following isn't just this passive thing where you just wait to be told and you have no mind. It's an incredibly active thing. It takes effort and preparation. I learned this last September. I got to go to Canada with Derek and some other friends with Doug Ament, who's an amazing guy. I see Doug over there. And we went dirt bike riding all over these crazy forests, these little tracks in the middle of Canada. I grew up riding a dirt bike, but not very well. And it was on open fields, not a lot of difficult terrain. And we were going through, like, for me, insane stuff. Like the trails, the trees on either side are just inches beyond your handlebars. And you're going over rocks, and we're going over these bridges that are, no joke, like 8 inches wide, and there's ravines, and there's these long cliffs, and I'm freaking out the whole time. I don't think I can do this. And I never would have done it on my own. But Doug's like, follow me. Do what I do, go where I go. And man, I was exhausted. And I'm gonna go again in September. I need to get in shape, because following Doug, even though he's a lot older than me, Doug's an old man, he can, it's true. But I say that, and Doug could destroy me at any physical competition, I guarantee that. I gotta get in shape if I wanna follow after him. It's not a passive thing. So we need to lean into this and explore, what is God talking about when he calls us to be followers? And I want to begin to talk about something here. And again, it's this reality, I think, to be an excellent leader, you must first become an excellent follower. We see all the time in business or in history where if someone is thrust into leadership or they're somehow given power when they haven't earned it, a lot of times they become an unempathetic tyrant or overly authoritarian. It's one reason why power is rarely successfully transferred from a parent to a child. You can look at history, you can look at companies, you can look at churches, because a lot of times the children are raised like princes and princesses, and they don't really have to answer to anyone. And they're given authority and power when they haven't yet developed the character for it. And rarely does that power transfer. It takes a rare and unique parent and leader to really develop their child. And so we can see the failures there. But there are so many good examples in history, in business, in the church, in scriptures that point to followers who became excellent leaders. I'm going to talk about three quickly, then we're going to move on. Some of my favorites. The first is this guy, Joshua. In Hebrew, his name is Yeshua. It's actually the same word for Jesus, but we call him Joshua. He was the right-hand man of Moses, and most of us know Moses was this heroic leader who led the people of Israel out of captivity from Egypt, and he led them, or was supposed to lead them, into the promised land. If you know the story, they actually got caught up in the wilderness for 40 years, and Moses never actually made it into the promised land. It was Joshua who led them in. But Joshua learned to be a faithful servant, a supporting role character for 40 years, not a passive, mindless person, a proactive person who took initiative, who was developing himself, putting himself in situations, asking for feedback, growing his character so that he could one day lead. And there's a story that after the people of Israel make it out of Egypt and they go to the borders of the promised land, they send out 12 scouts, 12 spies. Joshua was one of them. They're supposed to look at the land, survey it, see what the situation is. And they come back, and 10 of them are like, man, the people are huge. They're massive. They have massive armor. Their cities have walls. They're way better prepared. They're way better equipped. There is no way. I know God said we're supposed to go into this place. I know God is calling us here, but there's no way we can do this. We don't have what it takes. But there were two guys. There was Caleb and Joshua. He said, no, if God goes with us, who can stand against us? God is calling us here. We have to have boldness. And he is actually leading in the way that he's following. See, that happens sometimes. The way that you lead or the way you follow with character, you can actually lead people. But what happens is the people are afraid and they listen to the 10, and for 40 years, they wander and they wander and they wander in circles until they all die off, even Moses. And the only two people who remain of that generation are Caleb and Joshua becomes the leader. And if you learn, he goes in and he conquers and he sets up the very first realm of Israel. And I love that generations and generations and generations of later, there's another Yeshua, Jesus, who then begins to talk about a new type of kingdom that's not built on conquest, but that's built on grace and mercy and faith and love and boldness, and it will include everybody. But again, we see Joshua curated himself as a follower to be a leader. There's this other story, these guys, Elisha and Elijah, some of the greatest prophets of all time in Israel. And Elijah was this very famous prophet. And I want to read this story here of when he calls Elijah to be his follower. It says here in 1 Kings 19, so Elijah went up from there and he found Elisha, son of Shaphat. They have like almost the same name. It's very confusing. I don't know why they did that, but anyways. And he was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. What that means is Elijah is actually already a leader in this context. There's 12 teams of yoke drivers, and he's one of them leading the pack. And Elijah went up to him and threw his cloak around him. And when he did that, Elijah left his oxen and ran after Elijah. Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye, he said, and then I will come after you. And I love this coy, snarky response from Elijah where he's like, go back. What have I done to you? Like, I didn't say anything to you. Just threw my cloak on you. Why are you coming after me? But what it was, as you know, in this context, it's actually an invitation to come be a follower of this great prophet. But Elijah runs back, he leaves him and he goes back and he took his yoke of oxen and he slaughtered them. And he burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and give it to the people, and they ate. Elijah runs back, says goodbye to his parents, and then he burns his equipment. He said, there's no going back. There's no plan B. I've been called to something. I'm going to follow. There's no plan B. He burns it. He cooks food for his followers, for his people. He serves them, and then he sets out to follow Elijah and became his servant. I love that story. And then Elisha, if you know, for 10 years follows Elijah. And then when Elijah, the older one, is finishing his ministry, he asks Elijah, his servant, what can I do for you? And Elijah could have been like, you've done so much for me, I don't need anything. You've been such a faithful leader to me, I'm good. No, the guy says, actually, I want twice of your spirit. I want twice the power you had. You're asking me what I want twice the authority and influence that you had. And Elijah says, you ask a hard thing, but then it's granted to him anyways. And Elisha goes on to perform the greatest miracles Israel had ever seen before and since. And it's because he learned to be a good, faithful follower, and then he was bold in pursuing the goals ahead of him. And finally, I love this guy, Peter. Peter, one of the apostles, the rock. His name was Simon, but Jesus changed his name to Peter the Rock. He was a guy who was bold, he was brash. You know, he would speak first and think later. He'd listen with his mouth. He was always just the screw-up guy, but also he had such great charisma. Even to the point that one time Jesus tells him, when Peter's trying to tell Jesus, no, you can't do this thing. And Jesus knows it's a distraction from his mission. He says, get behind me, Satan. He calls Peter Satan and says, get behind me. What you're doing is distracting me. And if that was me, I would have been like, dude, don't call me that. I'm done. Like, clearly this organization doesn't recognize my talents. They don't recognize the influence I can have. Like, I'm being insulted in front of people. I'm out. I'm not going to deal with this. No, I'm going with someone else. I'm going to find another organization. But Peter has a character to not leave, but to learn. He doesn't leave when it happens. He learns from it. And we see 3 years later when Jesus goes and ascends, Peter becomes the leader of the early church. And it says in Acts 17:6 that Peter and the disciples turned the world upside down. And we here and now are living in the legacy of Peter, the person who was always getting it wrong, but who was faithful enough to say, I'm going to keep at it. I'm going to learn what it means to be an excellent follower so that I can lead one day. And through the way that I follow, lead others as well. So again, if it takes an excellent follower to be an excellent leader, and even of itself being an excellent follower, because we all are followers in some context, is valuable and important, what are some qualities of that? So I want to finish this morning with talking about 4 qualities that make an excellent follower. And as we go through this, one thing you can remind yourself of is the golden rule. So you can ask yourself, if I'm the leader, what kind of follower do I want? What kind of people do I want on my team? If you're trying to figure out what kind of follower you should be, ask yourself, if the tables were turned and I'm the leader, what kind of follower would I want on my team? And I love the golden rule. Quick tangent. We most of us know it. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Some form of that has existed for thousands of years in almost every culture, religion, philosophy, tradition. But all of them were in the passive or the negative voice. Don't do to other people what you don't want done to you. Don't do harm. That used to be Google's. I don't know if it still is Google's mission statement, do no harm. They're probably failing at it, but that's been their thing, do no harm. Jesus comes and he radically changes it because he makes it an active, proactive, powerful thing and says, you can do no harm, but also do no good in your life. And that's not what I'm calling to you. I want you to do to others what you want done to yourself. I want you to love others the way you want to be loved. I want you to value others the way you want to be valued and the way that you are valued by God the Father in heaven. So he calls us to that. So keep that in mind as we walk through these 4 things. I made up an acronym for it. I don't usually do acronyms. I think they're stupid, but I'm doing an acronym. My wife helped me with this one last night. Love you, baby. Thanks for helping me. And I had a dumb acronym, and she changed it. It's even dumber, but it's great. It's Kobe. Let's put it up there. Kobe. You can think of the beef, as I do, because it's delicious and melts in your mouth and it's amazing. Or you can think of the basketball player who sucks and is terrible and the worst ever. I'm from Northern California, so I was raised a Kings fan. Oh, yeah. So I like the Kings, like the Warriors. I was bred to hate the Lakers, so Kobe's the worst, even though he was pretty awesome. So There's probably a lot more Lakers fans in here, so I'm sorry if I offended you. But Kobe, we're going to walk through this. This is for you. Let's go through this. Let's start with the K. The K is knowing who you're following, knowing where you're going. If you want to be an excellent follower, it might sound obvious, but you didn't know who you're following and know where you're going. So many times we have no goals in life. We have no missions in life. We don't know any purpose. And so how do we make decisions? How do we prioritize? Shlee spoke a few weeks ago about boundaries. I spoke about a year ago about boundaries. How do you set healthy boundaries if you don't even know what you're working towards? You need to know who you're following. Otherwise, it says in scriptures, every wind that blows will distract you. Like, oh, that makes sense. I like that. Oh, that sounds cool. And what happens if you have no roots? And then you begin to eventually stand for nothing. So if you want to be an excellent follower, you need to know who you're following and know where you're going. It's vital. It's important. It's a huge part of it. I had this phrase when I talked about boundaries about a year ago. I said, sometimes you need to make boundaries to break boundaries. Because I think we're actually designed to break boundaries. We're supposed to break boundaries as a church in the way that we love, in the way that we create, in the way that we innovate. If you want to be someone, if you want to be the best athlete in the world at something, you got to make some boundaries so you can break boundaries. You have to have a strict diet and a strict discipline so that you can break through. Simple things. If you want to be an excellent spouse, you need to make some boundaries. You need to be able to say, I'm going to say no to working till 9 p.m. on this night because I'm going to spend it with my wife. I'm going to say no to this because I want to do this. I'm going to say no to that because that's unhealthy. That's putting bad things into my spirit when I need to be putting good things in. We have to make boundaries to break boundaries, and you can only do that if you know where you're headed. You can only set healthy boundaries if you know your priorities, and you can only know your priorities if you know your goals, and you can only know your goals if you know who you're following. Incredibly important stuff. And I love this scripture here in John 10. It says, Jesus is speaking. He says, my sheep listen to my voice. I know them and they follow me. My sheep listen to my voice. I know them and they follow me. I'm convinced that God is speaking all the time. Sometimes we just don't have the ears to hear it or the eyes to see it. Do you know the human eye has 3 color cones? We have a red cone, a green cone, and a blue cone. And from that, we can see a whole array of colors. And a lot of times we'll say, oh, well, dogs are colorblind, which is actually not true. Dogs aren't colorblind. They're just missing a red cone, so they see less colors than us. They're unaware of colors that we can see. And then you go up the animal chain, there's all kinds of animals with different varieties of this, up to the mantis shrimp, which is this weird, crazy sea creature that has 16 color cones. They can see billions of colors that we don't even know are there. We can measure them with instruments, but we can't perceive them because we don't have the ability to. What's crazy is with humans, the color cones are on the X chromosome. If you know, men have XY, females have 2X. So females, there's actually a percentage of the population who have a 4th color cone. You guys are superhuman. You got superpowers. You have a yellow color cone. That's right. There's actually a percentage of women who have this 4th color cone. What's fascinating, though, is they've done studies when they showed these women with an extra cone, these different shades of yellow that men can't see, only 20% of them with the cone can actually detect that color of yellow, even though they have the biological ability to. And the leading theory is, well, we don't have words or language for these colors. They were not raised to perceive them. So even though it's right in front of them, they're missing it. They didn't even know it was there, and it's there the whole time. But they can actually train themselves to learn to distinguish these new colors. And I wonder if God's speaking all the time and we just don't see it. Have you ever had that you're talking to somebody about like a certain type of car and all of a sudden you see like Subarus everywhere because you just talked about it? And like, oh, it's a miracle, it's a sign. Like, no, the Subarus have always been there, right? Like you're talking about a show and there's billboards everywhere. And sometimes we notice these things and we say, oh, God sent a sign. I think God does send a sign sometimes. He does work in miracles. But sometimes the miracle is that he's actually changed you on the inside so that you can see what was there all along. That car's been there speaking truth to you, but God's done a miracle in you. Buy a Subaru. Evan loves Subarus. I'm gonna get one. I'm gonna sell my ghetto truck and we're gonna go drive the mountains. So you gotta know who you're following so you can set goals and priorities, and you need to learn how to curate so you can hear the voice of God. O of Kobe, obedience. Oh, I'm so sorry. You're like, obedience, no. You're supposed to inspire us, make us feel good, Mark. We don't want to talk about obedience. Obedience sucks. Obedience is lame. But obedience is what we're called to. 1 Samuel 15, it says, to obey is better than sacrifice. What does that mean? What are we talking about? In a practical, day-to-day human standpoint, at our jobs, at our workplaces, at our organizations, I want to start by saying this. A healthy organization has space and processes and channels for you to speak, for you to give feedback, for you to be valued, for you to have a voice, for you to give input. Any organization that discourages you or does not allow you to have any sort of channel for feedback is an unhealthy, broken system. I want to put that out there. Good, healthy organizations are not afraid of your questions or your concerns, just like God is not afraid of our questions or concerns. He says, bring all that to me. I love stories in scriptures. You look at Moses, we talked about Moses. When God calls him, he has like 10 excuses in a row. Like, I don't understand this, God. I can't do that. I don't speak well. They're not going to believe that you sent me. And he goes through all these things, but God has incredible patience. He doesn't disqualify him. He walks him through all of those. But at the end of the day, Moses chose to obey. Even in spite of his doubts and his concerns, he says, I don't see the big picture. I don't understand the why, to be honest, but I'm going to trust you and move forward in that. And I think we need to have organizations, we as leaders need to create healthy systems where you can have feedback and voice concerns, but we also, especially as millennials, we need to be able to submit sometimes, even if we don't quite understand all the nuances of something. We need to learn how to bestow trust and obey if we want to be an excellent follower. That's a challenge, that's a word for me. Because I'm like, I don't get it, I don't want to do it, right? And you might choose that, you might choose to disobey. You might choose to leave, or you might choose to obey, and then you go and you complain about it the whole time, or you gossip about it the whole time. You obey, but you do it grumbling, and you create a toxic environment for your team. That's not healthy either. Again, if you're the leader, what kind of person do you want on your team? I want someone who's going to challenge me, who's going to wrestle things with me. By the end of the day, if I'm the leader and I say, I feel called to this, I need you to trust me. And we need to learn how to bestow that trust and create this environment where we can obey. And same thing with God. We know where God's headed. He's headed towards reconciliation. He's headed towards wholeness. He's headed towards love and grace, a new life and a new kingdom here built through us. But the details, that's the adventure. We don't know where he's leading all the times. We don't always see the paths. When I'm following Doug on the dirt bike, I don't know what's around the next corner. I would never go down there on my own. Heck no. But I'm watching Doug. I'm looking where he's going. He taught me about target fixation. He says, if you see a scary thing, don't look at it, because if you look at it, you're going to fall off of it. You look where you want to go. Keep your eyes on the path. Keep your eyes on who you're following, and trust. Don't do it mindlessly. Don't do it passively. But it takes great courage to obey, even if you don't understand, and that's what we're called to. And that requires trust, and it requires faith. And in this process of doing this, your faith will grow. Because here's a truth that I believe that's been true in my life. Faith is not something that's simply given. Faith is grown. I think it's from the grace of God that we can have faith. The fact that we can have faith is a gift from God. But faith is an action. It says it here in James. It says faith by itself, if not accompanied by action, is dead. But someone will say, you have faith and I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds. Faith is not just an idea, it's an action. It's a choice, it's a reality, and it can be grown. If I want to be in better shape, if I want to have biceps like Vaughn or like Joey, or I want to have abs like Sarah Lucas, and I ask them, like, how do I do this? How do I get in shape? They're going to say, first of all, you need to stop eating Wendy's all the time. Step number one, that's terrible for you. Step two, stop looking at my biceps. I'm up here. I'm a person. I'm more than just these sweet muscles. Step three, they're going to say, here's a weight. Start lifting it. Start lifting it with consistency and start lifting it with discipline until that weight feels a little bit lighter. And then your reward is going to be a heavier weight. And you're going to lift that with discipline and consistency until it's a little bit lighter. And then you begin to see fruit. You begin to see results. You begin to feel healthier, have more energy, and you look sweet in those shirts like Vaughn. It's what happens when you grow that. And so when we ask God, I need more faith in this situation. God, I need you to give me more faith. God's going to hand you a weight. God's going to lead you into a situation where much is required of you. You're going to have just enough faith for that situation because God says with the faith of a mustard seed, you can move mountains. You have enough, but you don't have enough faith for where God's taking you next month or next year. I can guarantee you that. If you follow Jesus, if I follow Doug, he's going to take me on crazier and crazier paths. I need to get ready. If you follow Jesus, he's going to take you into deeper places where you are grown and transformed and your character blossoms and your impact is multiplied. Your faith must be grown along the way. It's not just given, it's grown, it's developed, it's curated. B, Kobe, boldness. Joshua 1:9 says, have I not commanded you? I don't think we have a slide for this, sorry, my bad. Have I not commanded you? This is God speaking to Joshua, Yeshua, the first commander. Be bold and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will go with you wherever you go. Your leader, God, has given you a commandment. Obey it, but don't be afraid. I'm with you. Be bold and courageous. 1 Corinthians 16:13 and 14. Be on your guard. Stand firm in the faith. Be courageous. Be bold. Be strong. Do everything in love. To be an excellent follower and an excellent leader, because a lot of times it's the same thing. You cannot be passive. You must be innovative. You must take initiative. You cannot always wait to be told. I want people on my team who don't always wait to be told. I want them to be someone who sees gaps and fills it, or brings it to me and we ideate together, or they work with teams. I don't want someone who just sits around and waits. Well, that wasn't my job. We need to be bold and courageous. I have a saying. I like to say, the future belongs to the bold. If you know, I talked about this about a year ago. I usually scream it when I'm driving through a stale yellow light, and I yell it to my wife, who hates it when I do that. I'm like, the future belongs to the bold, and I go through it, and it turns red, and I make it, and we're fine. But if you look at anybody in history, anybody, any man, woman, anybody who's done great things, it's because they stepped out in boldness. I love there's a story in scriptures Jesus tells us, the parable of the talents is what it's called. He gives 3 servants 3 different sums of money, and he goes away to this master. The master comes back and wants a report. The first 2 had invested the money, and when you invest money as you go, that's a risk. You could lose it all. They invest and they get a return, and the master says, well done, good and faithful servant. The 3rd person buried it in the ground and said, I was afraid because I know you're a strong leader. I didn't want to make you angry. I didn't want to lose it. So here's the money back. I protected it. I kept it safe. And the master says, get away from me, you lazy, unfaithful servant. I gave you a gift and you did nothing with it. You were not bold with it. You had no courage. You didn't take risks. God wants us to take risks. Don't bury it in the sand. If you want to be an excellent follower, take initiative. It says in Joshua, God will be with you. It doesn't mean you won't fail. You're going to fail along the way. But God's presence is guaranteed with you along the journey. And that requires great flexibility as well to be bold. And if I can ask you guys, do you know how to become more flexible? That's a real question. I don't know. I can't even touch my stuff. You stretch. The only way to get more flexible is you stretch. You gotta be stretched. It's the only way to grow. Last one here, number E, esteem, Kobe, E. You could also use the word honor, respect, loyalty. A good follower knows how to honor and respect everyone on their team, those below them, their peers, and their leaders as well. Respecting and esteeming them does not mean you suck up to them. Does not mean you're a brown noser. That's a weird phrase, by the way. You're not a brown noser. You're not just a yes man or a yes woman or a yes gender neutral person. You're not just someone who says yes. That's not what it means. It means you show them honor and respect by doing the other things we talked about. And it also means in public spheres, you speak well of them. It means you hope the best for your leader. You pray and you wish the best for them, and you honor and you respect them in public, and then in private, if you have concerns, you have the honor and the respect to be honest with them and to speak boldly. Again, you might not like the answer, and that's where it comes into the other things we talked about. But you must honor them in the way you speak of them and the way you think of them, and also in the honesty and the vulnerability with which you bring. Kobe, the things needed to be an excellent follower and an excellent leader. I love this verse here, Proverbs 3:3-4. Never let go of loyalty and faithfulness. Tie them around your neck, write them on your heart. If you do this, both God and people will be pleased with you. I want to wrap up with this. I'm convinced that God is leading us as people, leading us as humans, as humanity, as a church into new things. Scripture says God is doing a new thing. Isaiah says, I'm doing a new thing. Will you perceive it? There are old, ancient challenges that we as humanity are wrestling with. And there are also new things that no other generation has wrestled with. Technology, biology, sociology, things are evolving faster and faster. We as a church need to be leaders with power and with grace and with love. And we can only do that when we learn to follow well. And so I ask myself, how do I know if I'm following well? How do I know if I'm going the right way? And I think Scriptures gives us two metrics: freedom and fruit. Because it says here in Corinthians, now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Are you following the Spirit? Are you experiencing freedom in your life? Are there things you cannot shake, things holding you back? Fear, addictions, the need for affirmation, the fear of what people think about, whatever it is. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, freedom begins to grow and to reign. God does not want to micromanage you. A good leader doesn't micromanage people. I don't want to micromanage people. I want followers who collaboratively with me know the vision that we're going as a team, and they're able to do these things to help get us there. That's what God wants of us. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom, and when the Spirit of the Lord is, there is fruit. There is results, there is change, there's transformation. Our essence begins to become more in line with what God is calling us to. The fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, self-control, empathy, creativity, intimacy, faith, hope, and again, love. You want to know, are you following God's Spirit? Is there freedom and is there fruit? I want to close with this. I love this in John 5. Jesus is speaking to his followers at the end of his time with them, and he says this: I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I have learned from my Father, I have made known to you. Jesus, the champion, the God of the universe, the Savior, says, I'm not going to call you my servants anymore. I'm going to call you my friends, my co-heirs, my co-workers in building this kingdom together, starting from the inside out. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear good fruit, fruit that will last, so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. And this is my command, that you love each other. God calls us friends, own co-workers, and says, you were made for purpose. You were made to bear fruit. We have work to do. We're going to do it together. Here are the ways that we can grow. Let's pray.
You are listening to the Makers Church podcast. For more information about our community, please visit makerschurch.org.